This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. There's never been a better time to make good use of your kit, inspire others, make some extra cash, and make a difference. Sell your used kit today at mpb.com/sell and let someone else love it as much as you have.
In this episode of the Photography News podcast, it's a gear special with Sigma's full-frame FPL, Panasonic's Gh5 Mark II, and this year's TIPA award winners.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast. It is our 25th and we are recording on the 25th of May, so there's a beautiful synergy. My name is Roger Payne, I'm the editor-director at Photography News, and in light of us riding high in the Australian podcast charts, I thought I'd introduce my two colleagues and ask them to name their favourite Antipodean location by way of saying hello. So let's start with you, Mr. Kingsley Singleton, contributing editor. What would you suggest is your favourite Australian down under location for photographic pursuits? Hi, Kingsley, by the way.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
I've never been lucky enough to go to Australia. I always imagined that I would kind of hop straight over Australia and go to New Zealand, which looks far more appealing to me and far less full of things that are likely to bite and sting and kill you.
So we were riding high in the Australian podcast charts, but now that you've said that, we'll plummet. Yes.
Yeah, these bloody POMs. I don't know. There are some places in Western Australia that I've often wondered about going to visit, and what they are is actually ex-British nuclear test sites where the testing of the atomic bomb turned all these deserts into glass, or bits of them into glass. And I always thought it'd be interesting to go and see those, and then presumably die straight after.
Well, that's not a response I expected. I thought you might have just said Ayers Rock and moved on, but anyway, There we go.
It's a bit wide, and also you're not allowed to call it that anymore. You're supposed to call it. Will will know what you meant to call it.
Uluru.
There you go.
Well, we're upsetting our Australian listeners left, right, and centre.
Are there any demographics left?
There's plenty. And alongside Mr. Singleton is the editor of Photography News, Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. Are we well?
We are well. I think we're doing all right, although we might be getting some hate mail from our Australian listeners. Favourite Antipodean? I think you've been, haven't you, Will?
I've been to Australia. I've been blessed with the opportunity to go to Australia a couple of times, and I do have a favourite place. And in fact, if I had to pick a city in the world to live in, Sydney would be very close to the top of that particular list. And one of my favourite locations, and to be fair, it's not a photographic location necessarily, but it's just a great place to sit and enjoy. And that's at Circular Quay in Sydney, because at Sydney, in the harbour there, you're sitting at Circular Quay. If you look to your right, you see the Opera House. Look in front of you, you've got Circular Quay itself and all these boats coming, and it's just a wonderful scene. And on the left is Harbour Bridge. And it's a great place just to have a glass of wine. Absolutely awesome. Absolutely stunning. I love the place. And like I said, it'd be one of my favourite cities to go live in. There we go. We might have earned some Australian listeners back.
Well, there we go. Let's get on to slightly safer ground and kick off the podcast in our usual style, which is to chat briefly about what we've been photographing ourselves. So, Kingsley, why don't you start? I presume that you've been out in the British countryside making the most of of all the wonderful flora and fauna that's out there, right?
Well, yeah, actually, yes. Literally. I have just briefly returned from a trip to Devon, where I was hoping to do some landscapes, but it was basically like being inside a washing machine for about 5 days. So that didn't really come to pass.
A bit soapy, you mean?
Yeah, it's very soapy in Devon, isn't it, these days? Terrible. But no, I had a lucky encounter, and then which then turned into a series of unlucky encounters with seeing some fox cubs locally. So I was out for a dog walk with a friend of mine, and he'd seen them several times, and we were wandering along, and I had my 70-200 with me because I was taking some pictures of the dogs, and he noticed these foxes had come out. So we sat there and we took some pictures of them, but of course they were quite a long way away. So it was a struggle to kind of get anything particularly kind of, frame filling with them. But they were very very casual. They weren't particularly worried by our presence. They were sort of gambling about, running in and out of the set, or the den, as we say. So I thought, right, okay. So and then eventually they went in. So I thought, right, well, what I've got to do is obviously get my hands on something longer. Ironically, I had actually left the 300mm lens at home. I'd actually literally taken it out of the bag 5 minutes before I left, because I thought, well, I'm not going to need that to take pictures of the dogs. Anyway, I came back and I thought, what I'll do is I'll either go back with that, or then I thought, well, actually no, I'll hire a lens. I'll borrow a lens for a bit, like a much longer lens. And actually there'd been some stuff, I think, in PN on renting gear and stuff. So that sort of came immediately to mind. So I managed to get a 500mm f5.6 PF Nikon lens, which is a great, it's kind of very light lens, and gives you kind of a hell of a lot of reach. And then sort of combined with a 1.4 teleconverter that I've got, I thought, well, now I'm perfectly equipped to tackle this subject. And then I went back, I think, on 5 occasions, and they didn't turn up again.
Well, of course they didn't.
No. It's like they'd heard the whatever jingle the DPD delivery van makes. They'd heard it and they decided to just become like introverts after that. I did get a couple of shots eventually, but it was after not days of sitting there on end, but I'd been and sat for about 2 hours a day, 5 days running, trying to go at different times, and then realizing actually that they seem to come out most of the time sort of around kind of 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's kind of when I went back. And eventually I did get one more shot, but what it did was it gave me enormous respect for wildlife photographers, and an awareness of sort of the elation that you get when the subject actually appears, but also the kind of the great long stretches of crushing disappointment and discomfort that you can go through while waiting.
So your advice is to actually turn up at the location not expecting to get anything, completely ill-equipped, and you're more likely to get an animal to come out and play ball photographically than actually having all the right kit.
Well, that's like, if you looked up Sod's Law, that's literally what it would describe, isn't it? Like, you'd have to, if you walked backwards to the location without a camera, then you would see, some sort of rare elephant gambling across the Lincolnshire countryside. But I mean, I was impressed by the reach I got from that 500mm lens, and it's sort of in conjunction with a 1.4 and with the fact that you can crop in on the Gh5 Mark Ii by 1.5 times to get your APS-C format. It works out as about 1000mm f8 lens. And obviously, with nothing in front of you, it's pointless. But I mean, I got some nice pictures of rabbits. They kind of, I mean, in a way, it gave me a bit of a taste for it. But it is like, I don't know whether you guys have sat out and done it, but it's like two things. It's uncomfortable, but you do sit, after a while you sit there and it's kind of bird song and nothing much going on, and you actually think, yeah, this is actually really nice.
Yeah, it's a bit like fishing in that respect, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of fishermen, Will, you're a frustrated fisherman, but you were out also shooting wildlife, were you not, over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I've done a few things, chaps, and I was doing some nature at Wicken Fen, which is a little outside Cambridge, a National Trust property. And that was kind of like a photo nature ramble organised by the Royal Photographic Society. So it's a free event. And there's a couple of Saturdays ago, and it just rained. It was horrible. It was quite blowy and very, very damp. Felt quite miserable on the wildlife front. Although we did have a bit of fun with a barn owl, or a couple of barn owls actually. There's an art installation there called they call it Mother, colloquially, and it's a hayrick. And our guide, as we were walking around, said, sometimes a barn owls roost in there, especially when it's raining, because owls, as you probably know, they're not waterproofed. So when it's raining, they have to take shelter and get the brolage up. But our guy said, if you go in there, the owl might be in there roosting, and if you scare it out, we'll be ready with our cameras. And I thought we were just having a laugh, a bit like an apprentice being told to go for a long wait. Anyway, I walked into this rick, and sure enough, the barn owl flew out.
Wow.
And they all got pictures and I didn't. Brilliant. But to be fair, it hung around. He flew to a tree, which is maybe the same sort of distance Kingsley's talking about with the foxes, a long way away. And he did come back. He did try to come back a couple of times, and we were still there. He saw us and he went back. But it's wonderful actually watching these barn owls hunt and fly around. It's absolutely awesome. But as a photo experience, it was a complete no go. But the other thing I've been doing is I went to an event organised by Timeline Events. It was a paid-for shoot. It was a Didcot Railway Centre, and they just have some reenactors, and there's a limited number of photographers, and they set things up, and they got a fog machine going. And I went down with my partner Annie, and we had a great old time actually. 4 hours of photography. Things set up for us. The weather was okay. I didn't fall into one of the inspection pits. And the only thing I did do is drop my brand new 24-200 lens. Whoa! And I dropped it onto concrete as well.
Oh.
But luckily, and we talked about this before. I know Kingsley and I have also talked about it on email. But the protection filter saved the lens. I mean, the protection filter was written off, and I had to break all the glass out. And the only way I could get the filter off was, believe it or not, I got a mini hacksaw when I got home, and I had a hacksaw into the filter rim because I couldn't loosen it any other way. I had, wrenches, I had filter rubber mats and all that sort of stuff, but I had to cut the filter off the lens. But the lens is fine.
Excellent. And I'm intrigued, Will, because obviously, so you're now getting out and about a lot more and in organised events. So are there any kind of COVID protocols that people are having to follow at that type of event, or is it pretty much a free-for-all?
No, I mean, there was a briefing, as you would expect, by the organisers before we all started shooting, and he said, look, 2 meters apart where we can, etc., etc. And when we were outdoors or in the rail sheds, some people did get a little close, but it was okay, because what they did was they would set things up, and they would ask the reenactors when the light got a bit lower and they needed longer shutter speeds. They said to the reenactors who were there, and they would say freeze. So they would say stock still for 30 seconds, a minute or something, and you could take your pictures. And then when you took your pictures, the organizer would say, right, those who got your shots, now get out of the way, let the people who haven't taken their shots get in.
Excellent. And so it's good to hear that both of you guys have been getting out and about now that we've got our new sort of found freedoms. So obviously, naturally, my photography these last few weeks has been done out the back of my house. So with this fantastic opportunity to get out and shoot more, I've actually stayed at home largely. And I was asked by a olive oil company to photograph some of their bottles. And they wanted them to be it to be recreated in a style that looked like they'd been photographed in rural Spain. So, given the weather that we've been having recently, and the fact that I wasn't going to get on a plane and go to rural Spain, much as I tried to obviously wangle that with them, I ended up actually photographing it around the back of my house, which is literally a sort of a farmland area, and I threw it obviously out of focus. I just needed some backlighting from it. And then, it was freezing cold, but they were happy with the images, which I shot using a GFX 50S, actually. Managed to get my hands on one of those with a 110mm lens on, which was a beautiful combination to shoot with. And apparently the picture's going to appear on the cover of some food retail magazine, something like that.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, so bit of an interesting challenge. I did sort of chuckle away to myself thinking, here's me surrounded by sort of rubble and general sort of farming and garden detritus, trying to recreate this sort of rural Spanish look to stuff. But hey, it seemed to work okay. So you can. I suppose that's advertising photography. You can pull the wool over people's eyes if you need to. This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. Use their free online valuation tool to instantly find out exactly how much your gear is worth. Get super fast payments straight into your bank account, and if you change your mind at any point up until you get paid, they'll ship it back for free. So moving on, we thought that we would have a little chat. We've actually been off for a slightly prolonged period. And quite a lot's happened actually while we've been away from a photographic equipment perspective. We've got coming up an interview with Tim Berry from Sigma, who's going to talk to us about their latest launch. But I thought we'd start, Will, with the fact that TIPA, the Technical Image Press Association, has recently announced its award winners, all 40 of them. in 40 different categories. And the reason why I'm going to bring you on this, Will, is obviously Photography News is a member of TIPA. So before we get on to the highlights of the actual list of products, maybe you could just explain to us briefly what TIPA is, where it's come from and what it's trying to do.
Yeah, it's a good point, Roger. I mean, many of our readers would have seen the logo and would have seen features in magazines, and they probably wondered what it was all about. But TIPA started as a European organisation. It's been going since, the early 90s. And I think I've been involved in it from very early doors. So like I said, originally there were magazines from Germany, Italy, Spain, Holland, the UK, etc. But in the course of time, it's expanded out now. And now we've got members in China, Canada, US, India. So there are 25 magazines currently. I just looked on their website, tipa.com, and I came to 25 magazines. They're professional and enthusiast. We lost a couple of magazines last year, including one we know and loved, Practical Photography. But we've now got a couple of new members coming in as well. So we'll be around 25 to 30 magazines, I guess. Each year we gather, and obviously nowadays, and for the last 2 years, we gathered virtually, but we gathered at what we call a general assembly. And we look at the products that have been launched that year, and we just give them our awards. And this year, as you said, there were 40 categories in a whole wide range of different subject areas, from the obvious capture, cameras, lenses, all the way to technologies like, photo labs and retail finishing, stuff like that. So we had a virtual general assembly, and the results are out now. And if you want to see the full results with a little bit of splurb that goes with them, go to the tipa.com website.
So basically, Will, it's when it comes to the products, because obviously there's been hundreds of, if not thousands of products launched throughout the year. What's the process? Is it just a question of everybody, does everybody nominate something, or is there a short list of stuff to choose from that you have a show of hands on? How does the actual voting work in that respect?
Yeah, but we have a short list nowadays. So there's a little subcommittee of TIPA called the Technical Committee, and they keep their eyes on what's coming out and what's really worth nominating and giving an award to, because it's obviously, something which is, it's recognised by a bunch of imaging magazines. This is an award well worth having. So the technical committee draw up a short list. In some cases, the short list is quite short, but in some categories there might be one or two products coming out in that year, and in other categories it's a bit longer and it evokes a bit of discussion. We meet on Zoom, and the organizer has a little gadget and we all vote, and it's all done virtually and all done secretly too. So no, it was quite a slick process. And in fact, it's quicker doing it virtually than in person, because when you're in person, I think there's much more likelihood of arguments and fisticuffs about, I want to vote for this and I want to vote for that. But virtually it's quite good because you don't see people waving around their hands. So it's quite nice.
Excellent. And so, looking down the list, and as you say, Will, I presume there's going to be something in one of the future issues of the magazine about it. And obviously, you can go onto the tipa.com website. But are there any particular highlights that you would pick out as being, particularly worthy of the award?
To be fair, it's been a very good year, I think, for kit. And there's some obvious candidates. They've won, for instance, a Fujifilm GFX 100S, that really compact 102 megapixel camera. The Sony Alpha A1 as well, of course, which it seems incredible. But one of my favourite bits of tech comes right towards the bottom of the list I've got, and that's Best Photo Lab. And that went to Whitewall. But it wasn't just for its processing. It's for this technology called Room View, which I'm going to test. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to test it. But basically, if you want a print for your wall, all you do is upload the picture that you're considering to put on your wall, and then upload a picture of your wall. So even though it's got, let's say there's loads of clutter around your wall already with a few pictures on it, you take a picture on your phone, you upload it. At their end, the software removes all the other pictures, and basically you simulate your picture on your wall before you decide whether you want that print or not. You can change the size, the type of finish, framing. That was my highlight. What about you guys?
Well, I was going to come on to Kingsley because no doubt he'll have an erudite message about the list. I mean, Kingsley, I think you did have something to point out, didn't you, about the list, because it's 40 strong, but there's a very notable number of absences from it, are there not?
Yeah, as a Marxist, I can no, it's nothing to do with that at all. What I noticed from it was that there's only one DSLR on it, so I think there are something like 8 or 9 camera categories, which are sort of
there's 9
strung out between beginner, advanced, expert, professional, and the only DSLR to feature is the Pentax Gh5 Mark Ii. So all the rest are mirrorless cameras. So I mean, what this shows, I suppose, is that these are awards issued to new products, and therefore people are not creating as many DSLRs recently as they are mirrorless cameras. A lot more effort's being put into that. So that, maybe that tells us something. I mean, it doesn't tell us that mirrorless cameras are any better than DSLRs. I mean, we don't want to rehash this argument, but it's clear that the trend in manufacturing recently is kind of pushing towards that, and for kind of lots of reasons. Something else I noticed was that there used to be an innovation award, or I don't know if it was a completely regular thing. I remember when I was on the voting panel, it came in one year. And I noticed there wasn't one this year, and I thought that sort of stood out for me. And I wondered whether, something had been missed. But then I was racking my brains and thinking, I can't remember anything that's come along that's been sort of genuinely kind of bowel-shakingly new. Like it's like things like the Sony A1, isn't it? It's like, yeah, it's a brilliant camera, but it doesn't. Does it do anything new, or does it just combine some all the amazing things into one body?
Will, do you know from being on the panel whether or not there was any discussion around innovation? Because it's a good point, isn't it, that Kingsley makes. That, I mean, are we at a point where innovation is really hard to come by at the moment?
Yeah, maybe that's right. But also, I think it would have been covered off maybe in another category. Just an example, that white wall room view I just mentioned, that's innovative, but it's also gone to a photo lab, and maybe TIPA didn't want to have 2 awards going for the same product to the same people. Don't know. It's a good point. But I think it's also right. I think it's covered off in different ways anyway. And, the Sony Alpha A1 is a good case in point. It is full of innovation, it seems to me. But it's won a different award. So, I don't know. It's an odd one for Kingsley to pick up on. Typical of him, I would say.
But that's what he does. He defends yourself.
He's a Marxist, as he said, after all.
I was slightly distracted by thinking, I can't remember whether I ever went on. I feel like I did go on a TIPA thing when Will was also on it, because I was representing a different magazine at that point. I think possibly it was in Budapest, and it was like, I think we got off the plane, there was this slamming door noise, and then like Will just retreated to a wine shop somewhere, and we didn't see him for the next 3 days.
Yeah, that's very disappointing for him that they're virtual. No, they're virtual. You don't get any of that, do you, Will? What a shame. Well, hopefully, Will, you'll get a trip to a foreign wine bar at some point in the not too distant future. But one of the things that one of the companies who did very well out of the TIPA Awards is Sigma, and coincidentally and very handily, Will, you caught up with Tim Berry from Sigma in the UK. And we're going to play that interview now. But one of the things you started off with was actually by telling him that he'd won 4 awards in TIPA. So let's have a listen to this and see what he had to say.
Right, we're joined by special guest Tim Berry for this podcast. Tim Berry is Media and Marketing Manager of Sigma Imaging UK. So welcome, Tim. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, good to see you too.
You're looking young and fit, and your hair's in good order. You must have had a haircut.
Well, actually, I did it myself.
No.
I did, yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, I learned how to do it through lockdown, and I thought, well, I might as well just carry on. I bought the clippers.
You're a very brave man. Well, look, so it's perfect timing, actually. I know it's pure coincidence, but when I planned this award, we wanted to talk about your new camera, the Sigma FPL. But news has come out today that you've won 4 TIPA awards. So you've won for best photo video camera with the FPL. You've won awards for the best portrait lens, best macro lens, and best ultra telephoto zoom lens. So well done to you guys and everybody at Sigma. Well done.
Yeah, thanks very much. We're really pleased with that. I only just found that news out, so great to hear. And there's only 40 odd awards, so to take 4 of them is great for Sigma. And I think particularly really pleased with the FPL one because Sigma's known for lenses. Everyone knows how good Sigma's art lenses are, and so to win those awards, it's great. But to win one for a camera, which we're less well known for, is fantastic. And I think Sigma cameras sometimes fly under the radar a bit because they're we're just known as a lens manufacturer, and sometimes people just kind of forget that we make cameras. So
well, I mean, it's appropriate that the FPL has an award, but that's why we organised to speak to you in the first instance. I mean, the Sigma FP series is fairly new. I mean, the FPL is a second in the series, and of course, it's I suppose one of the big selling points. It is the smallest full frame camera on the market. I mean, I've used the FP, and it's a remarkable beast. I mean, it's it's not beast. That's the thing about it. It's just so wee and mini, and I really enjoyed using it. So it's a great to catch up about the FPL. I mean, what's the sort of feedback you've had about the FPL so far? I know it's only been announced a few months. And
yeah, it's been very good. I mean, as you mentioned, we've got the FP, which has been out since the end of 2019, and that was received very well. Smallest and lightest full frame ever built, full frame mirrorless rather ever built. So yeah, a really game-changing camera for many people, particularly video people, filmmakers, and landscape photographers, particularly. I think those two groups really kind of latched onto it. But it was kind of our first go at a full frame mirrorless camera, and it was our first camera with a Bayer sensor. So over the sort of the year following its release, we kind of listened to feedback from user groups, and we commissioned some photographers to give us feedback, and we commissioned filmmakers to give us feedback. And the guys in Japan have kind of collated all that together and found out which features people wanted to see on subsequent cameras. And so when the FPL came out a couple of months ago now, we've added some of those features that people were looking for, and that people felt were missing off the original. So yeah, it's been very good. I think people seem pretty happy with it. I think it will appeal most. It appears that sort of landscapers, street photographers, documentary photographers, filmmakers, those are the people that are going to really go for it, I think.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the sensor, because of course Sigma is very well known. I mean, you own the technology with Foveon sensors. Why do you not go for the Foveon sensor in that camera?
Yeah, well, Foveon is fantastic technology. It's the image quality is really incredible from it, really genuinely incredible. It's almost looks sort of medium format-esque. But one of the problems with it is that it doesn't perform well at high ISOs. So it's not a good all-round sensor. Very good for landscapes, any kind of tripod work, that kind of stuff. But as soon as you couldn't really do a wedding with it, because if you push it up to 1600 ISO, it gets quite noisy. So the Foveon is it's horses for courses. It's a good sensor for a brilliant sensor for some jobs, and not so good for others. But the Bayer sensor is sort of an all-rounder. And I think Sigma wanted to bring out a camera that was a bit more mainstream, and so the Bayer sensor was just a good fit for that, for this particular model. There was talk of releasing a full frame Foveon as well, which I guess would have looked a bit like the FP, but with a Foveon sensor in it. But they had problems with the sensor development, and they had to delay it. And we've not heard anything more in the UK on that. But I think it is still on the cards. So hopefully we'll see that at some point too.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, of course, the thing about the FPL compared with the FP is that the resolution of the FPL is amazing, 61 megapixels. I mean, you can get seriously big files out of that. I mean, what's your favourite your favourite feature? What part of the camera that really appeals to you as a photographer?
Yeah, if you go back, I don't know, 10 years or so, it would be unthinkable that a company could produce a full frame 61 megapixel camera that weighs 427 grams. I mean, it's so small and light, it's unbelievable. So, and I think that kind of opens it up to sort of all sorts of different uses, landscape particularly, where you're carrying kit over a long distance, or you I don't know, perhaps you're going on a hike or something, and you need to be able to pack a few lenses and a camera into a bag, and you don't want it to weigh 5 kilograms. So I think it's for me that is the best part about it, that sort of that addition to the resolution. And I think if you compare all those ultra high resolution cameras on the market, you know, the Sony A7R Mark IV and the Sony A1, and there's lots of them. Canon have got one and Nikon have got one and so on. And we are the cheapest of all of them. So I think there's about 10 of them on the market, 50 plus megapixels. And we come in at £2,000, which is fantastic. And we're also the joint highest resolution with the Sony A7R IV.
Yeah.
So to get the highest resolution camera for the lowest price is fantastic. So yeah, I think it just, and you know, that just makes it, that sort of ultra high resolution photography a bit more accessible to more people, which is great.
I mean, you mentioned the price, as you say, it's incredible value. You also sell it with the EVF, you know, the electronic bolt-on viewfinder, and that's £2,499. So that's good value too. Have you tried the both together? I mean, I know you said you tried the pre-production FPL, and have you been trying it with the FPL and the EVF 11 as well?
Yes, we've had pre-production FPL and pre-production EVF too. So we've been testing that out, and it's really, really, really lovely. And it's nice that because the camera's modular, you can just take the viewfinder off or on depending on what you're planning to do. So if you just think, I'm just going to get into the park with the kids and take some shots, you might think, well, I'll leave the viewfinder behind because I just want to put the camera in my pocket. But if you're going to do a shoot, you might want that, maybe if you're in bright conditions or something, you just pop the viewfinder on the side. It makes the camera a bit bigger, but it's nice to have that choice as best suits you for whatever you're shooting. And that's kind of sort of makes the FPL quite unique compared with most other full frame stills cameras on the market. In that way, it's a little bit like a Red or an Arri in that you get this kind of box with filtered thread holes all over it, and you can bolt stuff on as you want. So you can put a grip on, or you can put it in a rig or whatever it is you want to do, or put the viewfinder on the side. So yeah, really, really interesting and innovative bit of kit that is just very different to anything else on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned video a lot. I mean, do you see the FPL going towards video users, or is there a bias? I mean, what's your target market?
Yeah, the original FPL actually was quite evenly split. It was picked up kind of relatively evenly between filmmakers and photographers. Probably even maybe slightly biased towards filmmakers, maybe. But I think the FPL will be more towards the photography side because the high resolution is irrelevant to filmmakers because at 4K you're only using 8 megapixels or something, so you don't need those 61. So I think that the high resolution will be a photographer's feature rather than a filmmaker's feature. And
the autofocus on the FPL is phase detect, as opposed to the FP, which was contrast detect. So I mean, you've tried the both now. So I mean, do you find the phase detect system much sharper, more positive, more accurate?
Well, actually, the original was contrast, and the new one is contrast and phase. So you get
both phase. Okay.
It is. It's much quicker, and that's actually one of the things that was picked up in feedback from the original FP, that people said, "Oh, could just use a little bit more speed on the autofocus." And so Sigma responded by adding the phase detect, and it makes it much faster. And
no, I'm really looking forward to trying this. And of course, this is a crop zoom feature as well, which is interesting because you're obviously making use of the pixels and just cropping in camera and to make more of your lenses as well. What was the thinking behind that feature?
Yeah, so in the past, if you've got a camera that's say 20 megapixels, you wouldn't want to digitally crop that too much because if you crop in 2 times or something, you're halving your megapixels, and so then you end up with 10 megapixels or something, and then you start to think, oh, hang on, is that too low res for what I need? But if you've got 61 megapixels, you can crop in quite a long way digitally and still have a very usable shot. Even if you discarded 40 megapixels from around the outside of your frame, you've still got 20 to play with, which is perfectly good for most uses. Yeah. And it's particularly useful in video because with video you actually only need 8 megapixels for 4K. So you can imagine, I think you can crop in 5 times and still have 4K. And it's really good because all you do is you just pinch the back of the screen. So it's great. So if you've got a 24mm lens on the camera and you're shooting video and you think, oh, I really want to shoot 4K. I want to carry on shooting 4K, but I want to have a 50mm lens on. It's really easy. You just pinch the back of the screen and suddenly your 24 is cropped into a 50 and away you go, and you've still got 4K footage. So it's very clever.
Can't wait to try it actually. Now,
yeah, it kind of turns primes into zooms, if you like, I suppose. It's a good way of looking at it because you can you can zoom in
Yeah.
without losing quality.
Is that crop final in that when you get home and upload the RAW, is that the crop final version, or you still get the full RAW?
Yeah, no, that's final. Yeah, so it just records those megapixels
What
that
you've cropped into.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. No, I can't wait to try this. I'm really looking forward to seeing the sample. I mean, I was thinking if any of our listeners have got any thoughts or questions, can we get them sent in to us and we can forward them to you? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, or if you go on our website, there's a web address there. An email address there where you can email questions in. Just send them our way and we'll answer them for you, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, Tim, thanks for talking about the FPL. Congratulations at all at Sigma Imaging for your success in the TIPA Awards, and hope all goes well, and see you hopefully very soon. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks so much for having me on.
So some interesting insight there into Sigma and the FPL in particular. Will, you sounded very excited about the fact that camera, you're going to get your hands on it at some point. I think you mentioned 3 or 4 times in that interview that it's like, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Hint, hint.
Well, to be fair, I did enjoy the FP when it came out, and it's the world's smallest full frame camera, and obviously the FPL with 61 megapixels resolution is, to me, even, and I think as we all know, I like megapixels. I can't wait to give it a go. But what do you guys think of the FPL? Have you read about it also?
One thing I didn't know is what lens mount is it? Is it a Sigma lens mount?
Sigma L mount. So this is from the L mount alliance with Panasonic and Leica and Sigma. And the interesting thing for me also is the fact that it is electronic shutter only. I mean, they like the idea for landscapes, and with electronic shutter only, I can see why. But that said, I do want to see how it copes with indoor, and I do want to see how it copes with not fast-moving subjects necessarily, but even with, if you do street photography and there's somebody walking in the scene, how much rolling shutter are we going to get? So I think it's a very interesting product, and also the way the FP series has gone, it seems that movie makers have bought into it extensively because it's such a small wee camera. And now this one is aimed at more still photographers as opposed to people who shoot video.
Kingsley, I would have thought when it comes to quirky cameras, this sort of thing is right up your street. So presumably you'll be investing or be interested to see what the FPL is like. I'd
go along there with what Will said about the original FP being more for filmmakers, and this one, I think Tim was saying as well, was this one is broadly going to be of more interest to stills photographers and particularly landscape photographers. And I reviewed the FP when it came out, and it is a really interesting camera, really interesting concept. And Sigma do have a really good track record of producing innovative and kind of left field cameras. There's absolutely no denying that. I mean, one of the interesting things about this as well is that, and I think it's the same as on the FP, but it's got this kind of ultra low ISO mode. It's like it goes down to ISO 6 by combining frames. So I don't know how that would work like with moving subjects like a landscape or something if you had a still day though. But I mean, presumably it means you can get very long exposures with very low noise somehow. But yeah, I mean, it's, and the resolution's really interesting because that's the most, isn't it? Or joint the most for a full frame sensor, and it's got this kind of zoom crop mode on it as well, where you can kind of where you can get those kind of those equivalent framings. And like that's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose you can put like a 24mm on, go to the 5 times crop, and you've also got 120mm. I mean, you're throwing away a lot of pixels if you go 5 times crop, but it could get you out of a hole theoretically.
Absolutely. No, a very interesting product, and look forward to hearing reading your review on it, Will, when you do finally get your hands on one. And on the sort of filmmaking theme, which I suppose we've touched on there, just before we came down to record this, we had news of Panasonic's latest edition, the Gh5 Mark II. Will, you've sat in on the press briefing. It doesn't sound like it's got a huge amount of new stuff, but a lot of tweaked stuff. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, that's about right, Roger. I mean, it's quite a long presentation. They talked about not just that camera, what they call the Gh5 M2, but also there's some firmware updates for some of its products. They also announced a development notice on a new camera. I think it's a GH6, which is for later on this year. And then they talked about this camera, the Gh5 M2. I mean, the Gh5 has been a really popular camera for video makers. I'm sure still photographers use it too, but it seems very noticeable when I go and, when I watch YouTube, it comes up, it's filming on the Lumix Gh5. So the M2 is a tweak of that. It's still got a 20.3 megapixel live MOS sensor, but it's got a new coating on it. So that's meant to cut down flare. So for instance, if you're shooting at night and you've got street lamps in the shot, they had an example where there was a bit of flare and ghosting around the street lamp on the old sensor, and the new sensor seems to minimize that. And there's no optical low pass sense filter, so the quality is better. And they've upgraded the processor, the Venus engine. So it's tweaks, and like I said, there's lots of video tweaks. And when the story comes out, if you look on our website, look on Panasonic website, there's lots of figures, and there's a lot to digest in terms of the video figures. But I'm sure filmmakers up and down the world will be clapping their hands with glee with this one. But I mean, for me, I'm a still photographer, so it's like, yeah, it's all right.
Well, lots of exciting stuff to come, if not that exciting to Will. Lots of exciting stuff to come. I'm sure we'll cover off them in various forms in the magazine. If you want to check out the articles that Will's referred to there on the website, then the website address is photographynews.co.uk. You can also follow the latest updates from us on our various social media streams, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we're on @PhotoNewsPN. So we'll wrap up the sort of new equipment announcements there. If you are shouting away and saying, what about the EOS R3 that I've heard about? We are kind of keeping our powder dry a little bit about that. There's been a sort of a developmental announcement from Canon, but we know that there's something coming in the future, and we have already got, I believe, Will, somebody from Canon lined up to come onto the podcast to talk to us about that as and when the launch is official. So Will's nodding his head, everyone. So watch this space, and hopefully we'll give you a more in-depth look at the EOS R3 then. Let's move on to some reader questions. Thank you very much to everybody who sent a question into us. As always, the podcast question email is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. Everybody who's sent a question in has used that email address. And we're going to start with the first one going to our sponsors at MPB. And this comes from a chap called Josh Miller, who emailed in to say, I want to take my videography more seriously, and has decided to invest in a dedicated video camera. I currently use Canon EOS, so the cinema range makes sense, but I don't really know what I need beyond the body. I have a £3,000 budget. Can you tell me what you would recommend I buy to get started? So handing over to Ian of MPB, here's what he has to recommend for you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Great question. So we'll try our best to help you out here. Personally, I actually wouldn't recommend a Canon EOS cinema camera for your budget. The reason for that is that to get into 4K in the Canon cinema range would require a much larger investment, which then wouldn't allow you to purchase other items that you might need, like audio, for example. So my recommendation would actually be to buy a Blackmagic 6K pocket cinema camera. It's a camera that's received rave reviews, mainly due to the fact that it's not extremely expensive, and it allows people to shoot in larger resolutions like 4K, and obviously in this case 6K as well. But it does have a really beautiful image, a really cinematic image that's really flexible in post as well. So that would be my recommendation. And a Blackmagic 6K will go for £1,729. Now, the next two items are items that I'm not sure you need. I'm not sure as to what your situation is with lenses, but I would certainly recommend something like a Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8 lens, which will cover the sensor size of the Blackmagic. It's a wonderful lens. It covers a very usable focal range between 18 to 35, which in Super 35 terms is more like 28 to 50. And it has a very, very fast aperture of f1.8. which again is very useful if you want to defocus your backgrounds, and that can be had for £600. Secondly, I would then opt for a fast prime, always useful to have one. In this case, a Samyang 50mm f1.4, and this is the Cine version, so it has focus gears already inbuilt into the camera, into the lens, sorry. So if you do wish to add a follow focus to your setup in the future, you wouldn't have to add separate gears. And finally, I would say a top mic from Rode would be perfect as well to complete your setup. I would opt for a Rode Video Mic Pro, and they can be had for about £130. And lastly, if you're miking up any talent, for example, or you want secondary backup audio, if someone else is booming for you, for example, I would opt for a Rode Filmmaker kit. So it's a really, really cheap way to get into wireless radio mics. So all in all, that entire setup would set you back just a shade over your budget of £3,000 at £3,009. But obviously, you might want to take out the zoom lens or even the prime lens. You might have those covered already, in which case it will free up money elsewhere, for example, for a gimbal, a tripod, or anything else that you might need. But I would say my recommendation would be to, if you want something that's strictly for videography, the Blackmagic 6K is a fantastic camera at a very reasonable price.
Well, hopefully that's helpful. So moving on to the next question, here's one for you, Will. It comes from a gentleman called Roger Finbow, who describes himself as an avid reader of PN and obviously a listener of the podcast. And he says, I've recently moved to the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds format, but I'm becoming concerned by the apparent lack of choice in interchangeable lenses for that mount. Everybody seems to be producing new L mount and Sony E mount kit, but rarely, if ever, Micro Four Thirds. I'm now wondering if this format is another example of technology which has failed to become mainstream in the same way that Betamax did, and whether it was a mistake to go down that route. What do we think? Well, Will, you're going to hit us with some stats, I think. Is that
well,
right?
It's an interesting question, Roger, and thanks for the fact that you've been reading PN, and long may you enjoy it. I mean, you don't mention which lenses, in which area of the lens world you think we're lacking with the Micro Four Thirds. So it's sort of funneled down the question. And I do recognise your point. And I mean, as an aside, a few years ago, and you remember this camera, the Samsung NX1 camera. I remember I went to a dealer event, and one chap turned up. He had a suitcase full of Canon kit, literally a suitcase full of Canon kit. And he traded it all in for this Samsung NX1 system. And 6 months later, that system had gone. Samsung had binned it. So I recognise that there is that potential problem. But I don't see it happening with the Micro Four Thirds. I mean, it's an open standard. So Panasonic and Olympus are deep into it. And yeah, I did do some figures. I just went to, as an example, without knowing specifically what sort of area Roger was talking about in terms of lens focal length, I went to a well-known retailer website, used some of their filters to funnel down number of lenses were available for different mounts. And it's very interesting, actually. I'll start at the bottom. This is, by the way, not like the UK entry for Eurovision, so nobody's going to get a nil point. But Nikon Z mount, there are 48 lenses.
Woohoo!
48. So I'm grouping
those.
That's
starting at the bottom.
Might be difficult. Yeah, I'm starting at the low number here. L mount, which we mentioned about the Sigma, and we know L mount's growing because it's got 3 huge brands behind it. But this dealer only had 53 L mount lenses. Canon R, EOS R, the new mirrorless system, had 56 lenses, optical accessories. Moving up the Fujifilm, there were 91 lenses and accessories, etc. And Sony E, they had 260 mounts and lenses, which is a significant number, especially when you compare, for instance, just looking at Nikon F, which is a DSLR mount, 249. And that system's been going since 1959. So, you know, Sony is doing really well. But a Micro Four Thirds with Panasonic, Olympus, and Leica, and people like that, 173 lenses. So okay. Roger seemed to think there aren't many coming out, but an awful lot out there already. So, like I said, I don't know what he's expecting to see, but it seems to me there are an awful lot of products out there. Maybe because, of course, the system is more established than Nikon Z, Canon R. So it's had time on its side and the number of lenses is built up. But maybe he's expecting more from, let's say Tamron or Sigma. Because I think Tamron only have 1 Micro Four Thirds lens and Sigma only have 3. But then Sigma don't have any Nikon Z lenses. So if anybody should be worried about the Betamax thing, I think it's people like Kingsley and I who've got Nikon Z recently. You know, let's be honest. So I think Roger's fine. So it's a good question, Roger. But I mean, I hope that kind of answers it. I think you're here to stay for at least for the foreseeable, but there's a lot of products out there and it's well supported.
So not so much new launches coming out, but plenty of established stuff that's out there. And a bit of Googling, you should be okay. Kingsley?
I think there's this thing called recency bias, which is an idea that suggests that people's opinions are based on stuff that happens to them recently. And if you looked around, that's probably completely true. That the idea is you look around and think, well, nothing's being launched. But, like Will said, there's already a fantastic amount of stuff out there, and from loads of companies that you might not have even considered, as places to buy lenses. And I was always interested in the micro four thirds lenses that Voigtlander do, because they do some very fast lenses. There's a 60mm f/0.95, which sounds great, and obviously if Roger's into portraits, that's going to be a good one to look at. And there's a 29mm f/0.8 that Voigtlander do for micro four thirds. So it's I think just spread the net, and also obviously ultimately we all love buying new things, but it's using things, isn't it, that is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Just one thing, just scanning through the Panasonic press release has just come out. The Panasonic have just announced development of a new lens for the micro four thirds. It's a Leica 25-50 f1.7. So it's a 50 to 100mm f1.7. So Roger, there you are. There's one new lens come out today.
And of course, the other thing to mention, bearing in mind we are an MPB sponsored podcast, is obviously the used market is always worth a look as well. So have a little look at mpb.com. I'm sure there's plenty of micro four thirds options. So Roger, don't worry. And you've got a great name, by the way. So moving on to our last question, Kingsley, I'm going to come to you on this one because this sounds right up your street. And this comes from Helen Daniels, who's from Stoke, and she says, I've always used the rule of thirds to compose my images. I'm presumably not. I don't think Helen means on every single picture, surely. But a friend of hers at the camera club mentioned how she uses the golden ratio rule. I've never heard of it. What is it and when should I use it? Go on, Kingsley.
Well, as regular listeners will know, I'm not a mathematician. I'm a Marxist mathematician. But the golden ratio is a mathematical system invented, or on sort of not invented because it occurs in nature, but noticed by the ancient Greeks. I forget who. Will might know the name, might have met them. I don't know, sometime back in maybe on a TIPA trip. But basically, it's one of these things that if you can read a lot about the golden ratio and try and understand it mathematically. And if I read out something now, it will explain it. It says on this web page that I'm looking at, we find the golden ratio when we divide a line into two parts so that the long part divided by the short part is equal to the whole length divided by the long part. Now, does that mean anything to you? No. Why would it? The rule of thirds is based on the golden ratio, and it's just an easier thing to understand, because if you split a frame into three, it's easy to do. The mind can do it easily. If you use the golden ratio, the line is slightly more in the middle. It's a little bit further over to the middle, so it just brings the subject a little bit more into the middle of the frame. It can be more pleasing. I mean, if you go around sort of steadfastly sticking to the rule of thirds, what you'll notice is that everything ends up looking a bit sort of pedestrian. Everything is bang on the thirds. When you move your subject slightly more into the frame, so not centrally, but sort of just a little bit off the third into the center, and you bring it towards that golden ratio, then it depends on the subject, but things can look just a little bit more natural. And the word natural is important because the golden ratio is found in things it's just in nature everywhere. Like things like your hand's ratio to your forearm is a golden ratio because the length is split in that way.
Right. So
you don't have to go around holding up your forearm and hand to work out where things are. But and I think overall it's just don't get hung up on the science, but just when you're composing, try moving the subject a little bit further into the frame, and you might find that the frame looks a little bit more balanced.
Anything to add, Will? Or is it just a question of not being a slave to any compositional rules and just photograph what looks right?
Yeah, I think you just have to take responsibility, Helen, when you compose your picture, that you place elements where you want them to be. And if somebody at the camera club or the judge at the camera club says, here, you should use the thirds and you need somebody in a red anorak on that third to make it interesting, then take it with a pinch of salt. You have to compose to how you believe the scene works for you. And so what Kingsley's talking about there, in a way, is right.
What do you mean in a way?
Well, you're not always right, are you?
No, I mean that's a good point that Will raises, and the idea that like if someone is saying to you, no, you must use the rule of thirds, it's like that's ridiculous because, as we've just said, the rule of thirds is based on the golden ratio. However, like if someone said to you, I think that you need to move, I think that you've put your subject sort of on the wrong side of the rule of thirds, way too off to the far side of the frame, then you could say that frame appears to be unbalanced to my eye. But ultimately, as much as we like to talk about these compositional rules and stuff, it does simply come down to what you think looks best yourself. And a lot of people have gone through history bucking trends and being very successful.
Exactly. Throw off the compositional shackles and just make it look right. Go on, Will.
Sorry, just to say, I mean, if listeners are looking at this thinking, what the hell are these guys talking about and how do I use it? Then for those of you who've got Lightroom, the crop tool, the crop overlay tool, I think it's called in Lightroom, it's got the golden ratio in there. It's got diagonals. It's got the rule of thirds. So I'm not saying Helen talks about when she composes the pictures in camera, but afterwards when you want to play with composition and see what works, use that crop overlay tool and try different crops. Make virtual copies and just crop them differently and see how you feel. But that's the crop overlay tool in Lightroom, just as a guide.
The other thing is to kind of there's as part of the golden ratio, there's the Fibonacci curve or spiral, which is the same principle repeated around the frame. So you end up with this spiral thing. And I know, you can go and you can look at books or websites and they say, well, here's how to compose with a Fibonacci spiral. And it's like, it's completely pointless. Like you can't find, I mean, if you're lucky enough, you might find things that turn up in your scene that, but like if you were traipsing around trying to get everything into a spiral, it's like it's just it doesn't work. Like it's great when it works and there's a natural balance to it when it lines up like that. But if you obsess about these things, you won't end up enjoying your photography.
Kingsley, if you had a compositional rule named after you, what would it be? A singleton. I don't know, a Kingsley curve? No, that's no good, is it?
The only thing I can think of is that no matter what the picture was of, there would be some element of husky fluff attached to it somewhere in the frame, because I seem to walk around with a cloud of it around me.
Excellent. Well, Helen, I'm hoping that's answered your question in some way, shape or form. But thank you to everybody who has sent questions in. As I said earlier, the email address to send your questions in for equally confusing answers as that is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. So as Kingsley waves some aforementioned husky fluff in front of his camera lens, let's move to the final part of this Photography News podcast and every Photography News podcast, which is to end with a Will's word of wisdom. So, Will, I think you've got a couple for us this time around.
I have. Well, we haven't spoken for a while, Rod, so I managed to come up with a couple. One is I mentioned the Steam Railway event I had the other day, and it's the first real kind of like proper photo shoot I've had out for some while. And when I left it, I thought maybe I should have just worked some of the muscle memory a bit before I went on that shoot, because I was a bit fingers and thumbs and I forgot which way the compensation dial worked and all that, the sort of thing which I just hadn't got used to because I hadn't used a camera in anger for such a long time. So my first tip is, if you have got a shoot coming up, just spend 20 minutes in front of the telly, just getting a feel for your camera again, which way the focus goes, if you like to manually focus, which way the dials rotate to adjust compensation, but just get the muscle memory going again. So that was tip number one. And my second one comes, about a month ago, actually literally a month ago, I went down to Felixstowe to photograph the supermoon rising above the sea. But before I went down, I thought, what's the weather doing? Because it was quite inclement over here in Cambridge. And I wasn't quite sure what the weather would be like and would it be worth the 80-mile drive to Felixstowe and, 160-mile round trip. I ummed and ahed, and in the end what I did was, I know there are lots of apps like Clear Sky and all that sort of thing, but I just Googled live webcams in Felixstowe, and I found a live webcam is literally over the promenade. I thought, sun shining, in the car, and off I went. So I know this doesn't work for landscape locations necessarily, but if you're in an urban environment, you're thinking, what are the weather conditions before I go for that shoot? Maybe I need to wear a coat or something. Take a set of filters, whatever it might be. Just Google a live webcam so you can find one and see the live conditions. I thought it was a great little thing which I found.
Fantastic. Excellent bit of advice that, Will. So on that note, let's leave on a high, shall we? and apologise once again to our Australian listeners. If you are listening to us in Australia, then please do get us in touch. We'll start a map of who's listening the furthest away from the Photography News headquarters here, Nick, out on the outskirts of Cambridge. So do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from everybody, to be honest. So thanks very much for your time, gentlemen. Thanks very much, first of all, to editor of Photography News and supermoon shooter, Mr. Will Chung. Thanks, Will.
Cheers, Roger and Kingsley. Nice to see you.
And thank you also to golden ratio aficionado and aging camera owner, Mr. Kingsley Singleton. Thank you, Kingsley.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you both, as always.
We will be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to speaking to you then. Bye. This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. Enjoy contact-free doorstep pickups which are safe, convenient, fully insured and completely free of charge. Plus, with 250,000 customers and 5 stars on Trustpilot, you can trust them and sleep easy.